Okay. I usually talk about it anyway as a lawyer. I'm aimed outside general counsel. Three things you should know about this presentation. One is everything I'm going to say today is about data and information which we've been used interchangeably. Europe uses data much more than we do as terminology. I use information in the U.S. Second of all, lawyers are typically boring, so I have to make my slides filled with graphics and videos to make it a little bit more entertaining. And the third thing you should know is I start off every one of my presentations with a joke about lawyers. In theory, it loosens up the audience, which is sometimes true, sometimes not. So let me start by saying, young lawyer, just graduated from law school, decides to open up his own practice. Sets up an office, hires a secretary, setting up the office, very excited. First day he walks in, secretary comes into his office, says, "You have a visitor." He goes, "Okay, give me 2 minutes and then bring him in." 2 minutes go by, he picks up the phone on his desk as the visitor's entering because he wants to seem like he's already very busy. And he says, "I won't settle for less than $100,000. Okay, you can tell your client that if they don't agree to it, you're not going to do it, and I don't really care, and that's my final offer." And he slams down the phone. He looks at the guy and says, "Thank you for coming in. How can I help you?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm from a phone company. I'm here to set up your phone." So let's start off by talking about it. If you've never seen this, it's a 1992 movie starring Robert Redford, Ben Kingsley, Sidney
Poitier. Weapons anymore, or energy, or money. It's run by little ones and zeros. It's data. It's all just electrons. I don't care.
I don't expect other people to understand this, but I do expect you to understand this. We started this journey together.
It wasn't a journey, guys. It was a prank.
There's a war out there, old friend. A world war.
And it's not about who's got the most bullets. It's about who controls the information. What we see, hear, how we work, what we think. It's all about the information.
If you've never seen that movie, 1992, called Sneakers, I highly recommend it because at that time, what they considered science fiction is no longer science fiction. So, when we talk about information today, I'm going to cover 3 subjects. I'm going to cover them quickly. I assume I sent Christy a PDF of the slides, so anything that is textual intensive, you can read for yourself. My goal is to stimulate your thinking and to allow for a lot of time so that you can ask questions. I told you about the graphics, right? Okay, so first we're going to talk about privacy and data protection. All of these things are changing, by the way. So in the classic world, the right to privacy started not as a constitutional right, not as a legal right, but in an article that was written by 2 people who ultimately became Supreme Court justices. In 1893, they wrote an article, 1890, for the Harvard Law Journal, in which they described the right to privacy, the right to be left alone. Why? They were concerned about the fact that with the invention of the telegraph, information from California could be transmitted to New York and printed in newspapers instantaneously, and they were concerned about whether or not New Yorkers had a right to know what was going on in California. So that's the first instance of technology that created this concern over the right to privacy. Today, we use privacy in a very strange way. Most of the information that you have and that you worry about and that consumers worry about is not really private. Your credit card numbers were given to you by a bank. Your passport number was given to you by the government. Most of the things that we have, other than your gene sequence, your retina scan, your fingerprints, the things that you do in the privacy of your own bedroom, assuming that you don't have Siri or Alexa turned on, okay, are yours. That's it. Everything else is not. And yet, consumers perceive the notion of privacy in ways that we have never intended. Surveillance, okay, information. And so what I've discovered, and what I think most of you have discovered, is the real issue of privacy is not not so much keeping the information secret. Consumers worry about your ability to exploit information about them without their receiving any value in return. So if you go to Macy's and somebody with a clipboard stands there and says, if you sign up for a Macy's credit card today, I'll give you 10% off everything you buy and we'll mail you the credit card in the future. Just give me all this information. And you will willingly give information about your firstborn children, your social security number, your bank statements, where you live, everything, to some woman standing there with a clipboard. And yet many people, consumers, will be afraid to put their credit card numbers online because they're worried about being stolen, even though certainly in the U.S. and most civilized countries, there's no liability attached to it. The bank will deem any fraud that happens. So this is what it looked like print, radio, and television days.
Long time no see, looking good.
Let's just keep this simple. I want a divorce.
What now?
I think you're just fine.
Come on, this is me. What's wrong?
We don't talk anymore.
I just put down a mill on a TV commercial just to talk to you.
Exactly. You do all the talking. I never get a chance.
Talk on the website, can't you?
Sure. If I want to say order this product. It's not exactly a dialogue.
What about the print campaign? You can't tell me you missed the billboard in Times Square. That was like a 200-foot tall declaration of love.
You're saying you love me, but you're not behaving like you love me. It's not genuine.
I don't know. The agency said I was genuinely being funny, genuinely being charming. They said you would love everything I did.
But stop not to a radio commercial. Look, whether you're funny or not, it's just I've changed. And you haven't. I mean, we don't even hang out in the same places anymore. You're not even listening, are you?
Coupons. You want coupons, don't you? Look, come by the store. I got 2 words for you: loyalty, redemption. All right, that was it, wasn't it? Let's just hug.
If you knew me, you wouldn't care about that.
No, sweetheart, I know everything about you. You're 28 to 34. Your online interests include music, movies, and things we've never before. You have a modest but dependable disposable income. Am I the only one that can have a problem? Oh, come on. Don't be like that. Look, I'll tell you what. Come back here tomorrow. I'll give you the chance to be on a Bahamas vacation. There's a small chance, minuscule, but technically still a chance.
So that's the interaction
Wanna be
between
like
the
old days.
advertiser and the consumer when there was print, radio, and television. Here's what it looks like today.
Pizza Palace here. If you have 30 minutes or 3 minutes, Mary, may I take your order?
Hi, Mary. Yeah, I'd like to order.
This is Mr. Kelly.
Yes.
Thank you for calling again, sir. I share your national identification number is 610-204-999-8-45-54610. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. I see you with a 736 Montrose Court, but you're calling from your cell phone. Are you at home?
I'm just leaving work, but I'm...
Oh, we can deliver to Bob Fine. Send up 175 like Avenue, yes?
No, I'm on my way home. How do you know all this stuff?
We just got wired.
Well, I'd like to order a couple of your double bean special please.
Sure thing. There'll be a new $20 charge.
What do you mean?
So the system shows that in your medical records indicates you have high blood pressure and extremely high cholesterol. Luckily, we have a new agreement with your national healthcare provider that allows us to sell you double the time as long as you agree to waive all future claims liability.
What?
Do you agree, sir? You can sign the form when we deliver, but there is a charge for processing. The total is $67.
$67?
That includes the delivery surcharge of $50 to cover the added risk to our driver or traveling for an orange zone.
I live in Orange Grove?
Now, looks like there was another robbery on Montrose yesterday. You could pay $48 if you ordered our special express submarine combo and protect yourself. Comes with soap and sticks, those are very tasty, they're good value.
But I want double meat.
Well, I'm sure you can afford the $67. You just bought those tickets from Hawaii, they weren't cheap, eh? But I think you checked out the budget each from the library. Up to you, sir.
Right. We're out.
Good choice, sir. Gotta watch that weight if you're hitting the beach, eh? 42 inches. Wow. And I think something was frozen, like, for Hawaii.
And how much?
Yes, Mr. There's a $3 off.
If you don't think that consumers worry about the way that information is being used, that was produced 10 years ago. So it's very paradoxical. I'm not going to read this slide, I'm just going to give you the highlights. People say that they worry about privacy, but they act in ways that allow, even encourage other people to track them. Anybody who's on Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok knows that. Okay? People say that they're nervous about the consequences of disclosure of their personal information, but the truth is that they often disclose information completely indiscriminately. People worry about the dossier effect of cumulative information simply aggregating on the web, the internet, and in your databases. And yet the truth is, we don't read the cookies. We don't turn off the browser. We don't set, we accept. And I mean, I'm to blame also. I go to the rental car counter and they give me a form to sign and I sign it. I'm a lawyer. I know it says that I'm going to be responsible for everything. I sign it anyway. We all download apps on our phone and we click, I accept. How many of you actually read terms and conditions and the privacy policies of the apps that you actually have? If we don't read them, why would a consumer bother? And lastly, people say that they want to limit the amount of information that's available. But the truth is, if you look for yourself on many of these social media platforms, you Google yourself and don't find a lot of information, you get upset. People do. People worry about the fact that they have no presence. So here in the world, as a lawyer, I'm here to tell you, you have to be concerned. Aside from GDPR and the Consumer Financial Protection Board, California recently passed legislation which they have amended twice over the last couple of years, which gives consumers rights that are very, very similar to those in Europe. Right to access information, right to correct information, the right to revoke their consent for information. California has actually passed legislation which says if you get consent to use consumer information, you must tell them a specific purpose. And if you change that purpose or want to use it for anything else, you have to go back and get consent all over again. In case you're wondering about California, here are the other states that have since then passed legislation. Here are the states that are now actually considering, bills are pending in their legislatures to enact similar legislation. And obviously, if you have clients that are international or multinational, you have to worry about GDPR in the EU, which, again, similar to California, has very, very strict regulations about your rights to use consumer information. You can ask questions at the end, and we'll go through this pretty quickly. Let's talk about artificial intelligence. I told you the graphics were going to be cool. This is the very first viral video created with artificial intelligence special effects.
Shaping up to be a rough commute out there today. Watch for an accident on the 101 near Sherman Way. And we're just getting word that the 405 southbound has been shut down completely. It's like some sort of police activity. It's kind of clear for a 2-mile stretch. We're running to off road and Woodbury. As soon as we get more information, I'll let you know. In the meantime, I'll let you know that the police are going to be inside.
American Airlines is not paid for the problem. So in those days, and you folks have been using artificial intelligence for decades. Recommender technology, predictive analytics, these things are all driven by algorithms, and artificial intelligence has been around since the 1950s. What's new is generative AI, which refers to a computer's ability to independently, a computer algorithm's ability to independently and dynamically constantly search the web, search the websites, search the internet for information and update itself to create new content as opposed to simply taking data and analytics and using predictive technology or even recommender technology to try to kind of analyze patterns and see where there are similarities and things that are usable by the advertising and marketing world. So these are dynamic and they also are unlimited. So it's audio, video, pretty much art, images, photographs, anything that can be digitized is available. So what are the major legal issues in the world of input? So who owns the data? And are there intellectual property rights that are associated with the data that you're putting into an artificial intelligence platform? Is there confidential information? Because if you're inputting confidential information into an AI platform, you need to start assuming that anybody else will now have access to it. If you're not familiar with the Samsung issue, Samsung programmers were developing code for their phone. There were some bugs in it. They decided to input it into ChatGPT to see whether or not the computer could help solve and debug the platform. The problem is that now all of their competitors who simply typed in what's Samsung developing that's new had access now to the code. Those programmers were fired. Samsung has a new policy regarding AI, but the damage was already done. Similarly, you don't want to put consumer information, private information about consumers into an AI platform. You then have the AI platform itself, which I'll talk about in a second. But the output, who owns the ownership rights and rights of publicity and whether or not you're infringing? Bear in mind, if you take a photograph, if you take a book, if you take information that is protectable and protected and put it into the AI platform, it is likely that what comes out of that is going to be a derivative work or based on the information that you put into it. And therefore, somebody may be suing you on the basis of using information, data, content that was created by an artificial intelligence platform. And right now, Stability AI, Midjourney, even Microsoft Copilot are all on the receiving end of lawsuits. Some of them are class action lawsuits based on their participation in the infringement process. Similarly, in the advertising world, AI platforms can create misleading or deceptive advertising or advertising that's simply not true. I'll give you an example from the legal world. Plaintiff and defendant had lawyers. They went to court. The defense lawyer decided to use ChatGPT to see if they could find cases that would support the defense of their client. And they did so. And they prepared a briefing based on that. And the lawyers submitted the brief to the court. Plaintiff's lawyers all took that brief and tore it apart, looked at it, couldn't find at least 6 or 7 of the cases that were cited. Turns out they were fake. They weren't real cases. They were either law firm, law school examples or cases that were simply put in there by somebody else somewhere in the world. Okay? That lawyer now disbarred. And the case, obviously, the defense is having a problem defending their client. So this is a real world problem. And they're, just as today, your agencies all have clearance processes to make sure that music that you use, photographs that you use, trademarks that you use, images that you use are all cleared for use before you submit it to a client. Now imagine how complicated that becomes in a world where you have AI platforms generating content that you may not be sure where it actually originated from. You know, this is supposed to be scary, but that's what lawyers do. This is job security for me. So here's the most overlooked issue, which is algorithmic bias. And algorithmic bias can occur in multiple ways. I'll give you some examples of it, but understand algorithms are developed by human beings. They're not developed usually by machines. Some programmers started putting the code together for the algorithm. Amazon used algorithms to determine who they should hire, who was the most successful candidates. Interestingly enough, they found that they kept rejecting women, Asians, Hispanics, Afro-Americans. Why? Because the data that they used to train the algorithm was from 10 years previously, when most of the applicants and most of the people who worked there were white and male. And therefore, the information that was on their resumes that were scanned in to train this were all words and phrases and terminology that were typically used by white males. And therefore, they kept rejecting all of the other candidates that didn't fit that profile. Similarly, think about it this way. If you have information, data analytics that says, this kind of person typically will buy this brand of laptop or this brand of telephone. And people who buy this brand of telephone tend not to repay their debts when they are loaned money by banks. It's almost like a game of, you know, in the late 1800s, there was a statistical study that said that the import of potatoes from Ireland had the same statistical likelihood as those people dying of heart attacks in New York City. Therefore, if we stop importing potatoes from Ireland, we'll prevent heart attacks. Now imagine an AI platform making those correlations and making those linkages based on statistical data that is by itself accurate but completely misleading. So there are a number of ways that information can be used inappropriately that you may or may not be able to control. The FTC is actually after companies who are using algorithms based on this, and in some cases have used a new technique, which if you've never heard of it, it's a new enforcement mechanism called algorithmic disgorgement. They are forcing companies, ad agencies, and advertisers to not just get rid of the algorithms and erase them completely, but to erase all of the data that was either input or output from those algorithms and start from scratch. So, artificial intelligence is a real quote, by the way, from Abraham Lincoln. Anybody seen this before? So Ghostwriter 977 is a real musician. He's a writer. He writes songs. He writes music. He did that. He composed his own original music with songs, music, and lyrics. Okay? What he didn't do was sing it himself. He basically used artificial intelligence to create the voices of Drake and The Weeknd. Drake's lawyers noticed that Drake had never recorded this song before. Where did this come from? Got their voices. Ghostwriter 977 applied for a Grammy. Fortunately, the Grammy Association rejected his bid to apply, and Universal Music sent a takedown notice to Spotify and Pandora, but not before there were 600,000 music listens before that happened. So,
I am not Morgan Freeman. What you see is not real. Well, at least in contemporary terms, it's not. What if I were to tell you that I am not even a human being? Would you believe me? What is your perception of reality? Is it the ability to capture, process, make sense of the information our senses receive? If you can see, hear, taste, or smell something, does that make it real? Or is it simply the ability to feel? I would like to welcome you to the era of synthetic reality. Now, What do you see?
So that was authorized by Morgan Freeman to make a point, obviously. But they are creeping into advertising. So Tom Hanks had to go on the internet to tell everybody that the dental clinics that he apparently was endorsing were not really from him. Taylor Swift very quickly disclaimed any relationship with Crusade. She wasn't selling their dinnerware, she wasn't endorsing their dinnerware, but they used her image and her voice and her name to create advertising around it. Okay. And fraud is continuing. Anybody heard of MethBot? Okay, so in 2021, I think, a MethBot fraud was perpetrated where they created over 6,000 domain names. They, I think, probably over 500,000 fake email addresses, and then began to use automation to click on websites, making it appear that, and they had algorithms that emulated human behavior, movements of mouses, things like that, which ended up costing the estimates are that it cost the advertising industry about $180 million in fraud because of clicks that were not real, but monies that advertisers had to pay many of these websites. 3VE, pronounced Eve actually, by the law enforcement folks, similar. They actually created fake websites that were looking like placement for advertising. So just as we were talking before about programmatic buying, okay, the programs all saw these websites as places where they could place advertising. So they placed advertising on a lot of these fake websites. And then they proceeded to have clicks to go through those fake websites. That fraud was caught pretty early. It only cost the industry about $29 or $30 million. Okay? So the fraudsters are becoming much cleverer and much more sophisticated, and the use of artificial intelligence will simply exacerbate that problem. Very quickly, those of you that have international, multinational clients, just last month the EU passed legislation, the latest AI Act, probably the first AI Act that regulates AI use globally. It will begin to phase into effect starting this February and phase in over the next 2 or 3 years in terms of their enforcement proceedings. They have a risk-based approach, but just so you understand, the fines that are potential for violations are enormous, as high as 35 million euro. And lest you think that you're immune because you don't do business in the EU, they have sued a Canadian company for violations of GDPR and gotten $17 billion judgment against a Canadian company that never did business in Europe, has no established presence in Europe at all, has never actually gotten client growth from Europe, but information about the British elections on Brexit were provided to them to do data analytics and included information about data subjects in the UK. And as a result, the UK data regulator went after them and got a judgment for 17 million euro. So you, if you do business internationally, have to worry about the intersection between AI and GDPR, personal information. So any AI system that processes information about European subjects, obviously there may be conflicting rules, and there also may be penalties under each of these regulations that could be duplicative even though it's the same actual event. So last but not least, let's talk about ethics. From a consumer point of view, the major issues about the ethical use of their data revolve around privacy, around trust, around how you manage the data and use it, and competition that is fair and even-handed. So it's a balance between using data responsibly with integrity, but also needing to satisfy your clients that want results, that want performance, that want effective advertising. So the amount of data that's being collected is huge compared to what has been in the days of where you saw that video about the consumer and the advertiser who knew a little bit about their client. Okay? Data analytics, your jobs have become much more sophisticated and much more complicated. Your ability to specifically target and have clear data analytics has become much more refined over the last 10 or 20 years. And lastly, read the newspapers. Every time there's a data breach, somebody talks about millions and millions of bits of personal information potentially being hacked. So some things are legal, but they're not ethical. Nobody would think this is a great advertisement today. This is an ad from PETA. Most people would think it's pretty sad today. This is what a McDonald's Big Mac actually looks like versus what the advertisement looks like. If you don't think that consumers, by the way, pay attention to this, they do. Again, another pretty inappropriate ad. Would you buy an Avon product based on an ad that highlights potential abuse? But my favorite, not palm, this is my favorite. 99.9% of germs it kills. Not sure that anybody would want to buy soap based on that advertisement. Yet these are ads that actually ran. From an EU perspective, here's the way that the GDPR principles and the AI principles, and again, bear in mind that European regulators have much more discretion to decide what they like and don't than in the U.S. In the U.S., lawyers find loopholes and you can drive a truck through it. In the EU, the data regulators have wide-ranging discretion in trying to decide what they like and what they don't. So ethical principles go well beyond just legal. They have to do with the way that people perceive, and violations of ethics and morals and doing what's right in advertising can damage your reputation a lot more than a lawsuit from the court or a regulatory investigation from the Federal Trade Commission. So when I used to teach classes in ethics at my former corporate job, I used to give them 5 questions. The first one, if what you were planning to do is going to be in tomorrow's headlines, would you be proud of it or would you be ashamed of it? If you told all of your coworkers what you were going to do, would you want them to follow your example? What about if you told a loved one what you were doing? Would they respect you and admire you more or less? And again, bear in mind that ethics is a very, very subjective thing. It's not so easy to kind of make some decisions. Yes, there's black and then there's white, but a lot of this is in the gray area. And these kind of questions are the kind of questions that everyone should ask themselves when they're preparing ads. If you told your children, or if you don't have children, the children of a loved one, would you want them to tell their colleagues and their teachers what you're doing? And last, I know if I told my mother some of the things that I should be doing, she would tell me right away what the difference is between right and wrong. So these are kinds of things that they go beyond the legal principles, but they are important because ethics in advertising is often something that the consumers will perceive and will feel that there is value in companies that are not just following the law, but they are ethical. And to give you a brief anecdote. My first job in corporate law when I graduated law school was at American Express. And I was the lawyer who was responsible. This was before they had data privacy and GDPR regulations, so I won't tell you that I started there in the Jurassic Age. But the reality is that I went to Brussels and talked to them about the OECD privacy guidelines and their new proposal to create this general data protection regulation. I spent a lot of time shuttling back and forth, talking to the commissioners, and I went back and had to brief the chairman of the board. And he looked at me, and I told him about all these regulations and all these things they had to worry about with the card members and all the information. And bear in mind, credit card companies know everything you do. And people don't walk around with cash anymore. So everywhere you go, every charge you make, every preference in buying you make, they know. Chairman looked at me and said, that's not a bad thing. We need to use this as a competitive advantage. We need to tell consumers we value their information and we won't share it with others unless you give us permission to do that. And kind of the light bulb went off in my head and I said, that's smart. And so for decades, American Express basically said, we will not share any of your information with any of the credit bureaus. We won't tell anybody what we're doing. It's between you and us. Our card member base grew inordinately based on just the simple ethical value of being trustworthy. When the Great Depression hit in 1929 and American Express travelers' checks, the offices of American Express were open, paying people money out of travelers' checks when they wanted to redeem them when the banks were all closed. Which is why my dad, on the day he died, had a $20 traveler's check in his wallet that he had from 1948. So, understand that trust and ethics are extraordinarily important. I'm flying away. So I want to thank Carly and Christy for putting this together. I want to thank Samantha for hosting, and I'll give you a chance to ask me very, very difficult and challenging questions. So you're all done.
Who's first?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
So, I think it was last year, and I think it was the University of Chicago put out a program called Nightshade. And what Nightshade was doing was deliberately obscuring the information under the image to fake out the AI. Legal, illegal, where does that run on the spectrum? Probably not ethical, but they were proving the point when they got hundreds of thousands of downloads.
I think you're right. Probably not illegal, but clearly unethical. And again, these kinds of things can damage reputations when they get out. And you have to assume that at some point in today's world, they will ultimately get out. You also have to worry about whether or not any of that information goes beyond the individual platform that it was input into. And a lot of these, there are at least, I don't know how many you guys use, but between ChatGPT, Jasper, Claude, Copilot, there are huge numbers of platforms. And even though they are all kind of driven by separate AI algorithms, the truth is that you can't stop ChatGPT from gathering information that Claude outputs into the internet when you ask it a question, because these are all public platforms. And so the opportunity for even misleading information to just become reality is ridiculous.
So that's another question. So public LLMs are one thing, and there's guidelines that are coming out. What about the private LLMs? So if I'm a corporation or an agency that's loading it up with our information, we're using the technology, but it's not out in the public, it's gated. How do you, is there a body of regulation that's coming out on PLLMs on the private sector?
The answer is in the U.S. not yet, although the White House there are kind of principles that they are looking at, and Congress is thinking about kind of looking at it. The EU is the first to actually regulate how AI platforms are managed and how they are used. There are two aspects to the regulation, and I assume that the U.S. is going to go there as well, which is one is the platforms themselves, how they're put together, and making sure that there is no bias. The second element would be use of those platforms. So, it's a very difficult. I tell clients, agency clients, you should have no qualms about using any AI platform to enhance the productivity and the operations of your own business. So, to look at patterns, to stimulate thinking, to kind of do things that will help you do your job for clients better is 100% okay. Because that's not anything that's proprietary to clients. Starting to use AI for client work, now you have an issue of how transparent you need to be. You have to disclose it to them, you have to get their permission, and what do you need to do to make sure that the output is okay? And again, more and more agencies are adopting policies and putting together groups of people within the agency to try to develop policies and procedures and things that will help make sure that you're not bearing the risk. And the other point I would make to you is you need to also make sure that your vendors, your suppliers, most of you have hire videographers, you hire freelancers, you hire graphic artists. When you work on projects, you hire external people to help when you need additional resources or resources you don't have. What do they do? If you don't know whether or not they're using artificial intelligence, and you don't know where their work comes from and what their output is, how can you then go to a client and represent that, yes, all of the work that I'm giving you belongs to you, it's a commissioned work made for hire, whatever you want to call it, but you will own all the rights to it. Well, how do you know that's true if you aren't kind of buttoned up with your contracts with the vendors and the people who you use, and you don't have policies internally that tell employees what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed? My experience is just saying no doesn't work. Telling employees they can't use artificial intelligence doesn't work. People are working remotely, people get on the internet, but telling them what they can do and what they should do is a much better approach than just saying no, don't do it. Which is why I tell agencies all the time, start developing policies, have your HR people train, remind people, give them a way to ask questions that they can get answers to. Don't just create a big bureaucracy. If somebody wants to know which platform should I use for graphics or for images, well, DALL-E or Adobe may be fine because they actually represent that they license the images and that they compensate the people who own the content. ChatGPT may not. Tell people that.